Hi everyone, welcome to Ask a Property Manager episode 74. Today is June 9th, 2021. We're coming to you live from Studio 2.0 here at Own Buffalo. I'm Andrew Schultz, Principal Broker of Own Buffalo Inc. And on today's show, we're going to be talking about when lumber prices will finally start to come down. What exactly is a lawful source of income? We'll answer some questions from housing providers around the country and so much more. Before we jump into that, we're going to plug our social media real quick. New episodes of Ask a Property Manager drop every Wednesday, 10 a.m. Eastern on our Facebook page. You can also catch the replay the same day on both Facebook and our YouTube page. Don't forget about our Instagram as well. We post things there that don't make it onto our Facebook or our YouTube. And last but not least, don't forget about the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast. Current episode of the podcast is taking a look at different methods used to sign leases, tips for living in the same building as your tenants, and providing appliances and rentals. Is it really necessary or not so much? So don't miss out on that. New episodes of the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast drop every other Thursday morning, everywhere podcasts are heard, or over at rentprep.com/podcast. We're going to go ahead and jump right into our news of the day here, starting with this article from CNBC about lumber prices. Lumber executive sees further relief in sky-high prices, says delaying building projects makes sense. This was published yesterday afternoon on June 8th, 2021. We're going to go ahead and get into this here. Lumber industry veteran Kyle Little told CNBC on Tuesday that it's a sensible decision to hold off on beginning discretionary building projects due to high wood costs. The jobs that you have coming up, don't expect us to go back to what we saw 10 years ago. That being said, if you can wait, there's no reason not to, the chief operating officer at Sherwood Lumber said on the exchange. We do see some relief over the next 6 to 12 months, still albeit at prices that are much higher than what we've been experiencing in the recent past. Added Little, who spent more than a decade at Sherwood Lumber, a privately held New York-based wholesale distributor. He's also a former lumber trader. Lumber futures have faced significant weakness in the past month, following a major move higher during the COVID pandemic. Lumber futures for July delivery fell more than 5% to $1,158 per thousand board feet on Tuesday, which is down more than 30% from a record of $1,711 on May 10th. Despite the recent declines, lumber remained up more than 200% in the past 12 months. In late May, Little told CNBC he expected the current lumber cycle featuring volatile trading and elevated prices to remain for the foreseeable future. At the time, he stressed that prices could come off their highs, but still be above historic averages. He reiterated that view Tuesday, saying that the company's forecast really has not changed. We're in month number 12 of what we believe to be a 24 to 30 month cyclical bull wave, Little said. We really believe the new 3-year mean will be much, much higher, almost 2 times than what we've seen in the previous 20 years. The sharp move higher in wood prices has added costs to projects and was cited as one of the factors behind a drop in housing construction that was reported in April. Little said a pullback in lumber was inevitable as higher prices tame demand. These buildings and our customers are very savvy, Little said. They're instructing their customers if they don't need to be done today, it might be better time to take a breather and start this project later in the fourth quarter, possibly in Q1 of 2022. So that's kind of interesting. I actually looked at lumber prices locally here, just looking at the Home Depot website, and typically the lumber prices here do update at the beginning of the week, just the same as they do on lumber futures and things of that nature by the sounds of things. And I saw an increase in 2x4s again this week. I mean, it jumped up almost a full $1 from last week to this week just on 2x4s. So while on the macro level we might start to see some adjustments, it'll be interesting to see how long it takes for that to actually impact on the micro level, at the individual store level and at the individual consumer's pockets. Because I think that this is one of those situations that even they say it here, they expect to see some relief over the next 6 to 12 months, still albeit at prices that are much, much higher than prices we've experienced in recent past. $2 to $3 2x4s are gone. We're never going to see $2 to $3 2x4s again, in my opinion. I think that this was probably going to settle somewhere in the $5 to $6 range, which is still a doubling of that particular material. I don't think that we're going to see $2 to $3 2x4s anytime in the near future, or possibly ever again. I think that this is a permanent move, maybe not to the full extent of where we're at right now, but a lot of people were calling this right from the very beginning. You're going to see these lumber companies move up their prices. They'll roll them back a little bit, but they're never taking them back to what they used to be. So It'll be interesting to see how long it takes for this to happen. They're calling for a, what did they say, a 24 to 30 month cycle, and they say that we're 12 months into it. So that would put us another 12 to 18 months out. Hopefully we start to see some relief here soon, but I do think it's interesting that they're actually instructing their customers, if it doesn't need to be done today, maybe it's time to hold off. So what do you think? Is this going to cause you to delay doing a project? Have you already delayed a project because of the cost of building materials, or are you still trucking along just business as usual? Go ahead and comment down below. I'm interested to see what everybody's doing with their projects around the area. We're going to jump over the second article, this one via Buffalo Business First. And this is an article that's probably a little bit more interesting to our local Western New York viewership. Uniland tweaks plans for the Eastern Hills Mall Town Center redevelopment. This was published again yesterday as well from Buffalo Business First. The future of the Eastern Hills Mall and its conversion from a suburban shopping center into a mixed-use town center benefited from the pandemic. In that sluggish COVID-19 year, team leaders of Uniland Development sat down to tweak plans for the $250 million multi-phase conversion of the 51-year-old Transit Road Northtown's retailing hub. Uniland changed architects from Gensler of San Francisco to the BCT Design Group of Baltimore. The town center concept, while still the theme, dropped a hotel and scaled back retail and restaurant space. Pre-COVID, retail and restaurant space accounted for 20% of the 51-year-old Clarence Center. Now it has been reduced to 10%, said Carl Montante Jr., Uniland Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Initiatives. Uniland will submit the alter plans for the Eastern Hills Town Center to the Town of Clarence officials in June. The first phase would focus on the north end of the 100-acre complex. Our intent is to turn the mall inside out, Montante said. Uniland hopes to keep as many of the mall's existing tenants as possible, especially since many are locally owned mom-and-pop independent operations, he said. As work on the north end begins, tenants will have the option to relocate to the south end. Plans call for office space, apartments, a microbrewery, fitness center, and restaurant. The central design may be an east-west roadway, beginning at Transit Road that cuts through the property, leading to residential development on Eastern Hills' eastern boundary line. Off that road will be a pedestrian plaza and a walkway, kind of like a 2-acre pocket park. If there's one thing we all learned during the pandemic, it's that people want to be outdoors, Montante said. Increased outdoor space is almost mandatory for any development here or elsewhere. Also in the works is a walking and bike path that will skirt the perimeter of the entire Eastern Hills property. The intent, he said, is to open up the property and make it more inviting. The Z-shaped 800,000 square foot Eastern Hills Mall was designed in the late 1960s when shopping centers wanted to keep customers inside. When completed after a 10-year phase, the Eastern Hills Town Center, 10-year phase plan, the Eastern Hills Town Center will have 2 million square feet with 40% allocated for market rate or senior housing. Pedestrian walkways and pocket parks will play a large role, Montante said. We consider this a development jigsaw puzzle. What we are focusing on now is just the first piece of the puzzle. 3 other town center concepts are in the works. Developer Douglas Jamal is working on converting the current Boulevard Mall in Amherst into a town center with a focus on market rate and senior housing, retail, and dining. It's a design work in progress, he said. Amherst Supervisor Brian Culpa said he expects Jamal to submit a more formal development plan later this year. Everyone is anxious to see what's going to happen there. In Cheektowaga, plans are underway to convert the closed Lord & Taylor department store at the Walden Galleria into a business center. Initial plans were for the 2-story, 100,000 square foot store to be converted into a co-working complex called York Factory. Those plans are being adjusted as the store is being marketed for more traditional office space. Some flexibility is important, said Shayna Stenger, CBRE Buffalo managing partner and broker. We're going to let market conditions dictate whether it's entirely co-working or straight-up office or a combination. Essentially, what I wanted to draw from this article is that there's going to be a lot of redevelopment of mall spaces that are starting to see more vacancy, and in some cases is already vacant. I mean, there's pretty substantial chunks of the Boulevard Mall that are vacant. The Eastern Hills Mall has pretty substantial chunks that are vacant. The Summit Park Mall up in Niagara Falls, Wheatfield area is, I believe, completely vacant at this point, except for maybe the out parcels. And it's interesting to see how they're planning to redevelop these buildings such that there's some sort of an adaptive reuse that makes sense for the community. One thing I do think that's interesting is the adjustment on the retail and restaurant space. So they had set up for retail and restaurant to be almost 20%, and that's now been reduced to 10%. They halved it. which I think is interesting. That tells me that they don't feel that there's going to be as much draw for retail and restaurant space as what they had initially thought. I'm sure that they can make adjustments during the later phases to add more retail and restaurant as demand grows, as demand starts to pick back up. But right now, I think it's interesting that they've made that swing for at least this first phase to reduce that overall amount of retail and restaurant space. So that's interesting. It'll be interesting to see more as these plans start to develop and people start to come forward with actual, full-fledged plans to show us what they're planning. I'm super, super interested. A lot of these things are in the middle of very, populous areas, so it'll be interesting to see how they can make these a viable community asset, especially with the parks and things like that. So very, very interesting. Looking forward to see how these properties redevelop. We're going to start with something humorous here. This is one that I pulled off of Facebook, or maybe Instagram. Looks like this one came off of Instagram. These bidding wars are getting to be a bit much. I thought that one was pretty funny, and honestly, I don't think we're too far off of that for some people here in Western New York. This next one's not quite as funny, but I wanted to share it anyway. This was actually pulled from the Rent Prep for Landlords Facebook group, and this is an interesting post. I scrubbed the location. I will tell you it's not in the United States. It is in Canada, Toronto area, but I won't go any more into it than that. 1 bed, 1 bath house, $3,200 a month, plus utilities, plus property taxes. Coin laundry available in the basement for tenants. Shower timer set to 2.5 minutes max, and cool down time set to 1 hour. Sharing is caring. Absolutely no cooking or vehicle washing. Toilet flushes limited to 2 a day. All taps are usage metered. Surpassing limits will ensure higher utility costs end of month. Grade A plus tenants only. First and last. And backdated checks for 1 year up front. No guests permitted. Evictions can occur without notice. I would like to hope that this is a joke, but good Lord of living, I certainly am terrified if it's not. Could you imagine if you were actually posting this as a serious ad for an apartment? Like, I don't know the laws in Canada regarding fair housing and stuff like that. Not on any real appreciable level or anything, but I would have to assume that just about everything in this post is not legal, not valid, and certainly not normal. But holy cow, when I saw that, I had to share it. I just thought that was absolutely insane. Not so much humorous, but definitely something that makes you scratch your head and go, We're going to go ahead and jump to our questions from housing providers around the country. We're going to go ahead and start with this one on a high water bill. We have a 2-bed, 2.5 bath townhouse, approximately 1,300 square feet. Our May water and sewer bill has gone out of control to $250. Normally it's around $60. We checked all over the house. There's no leaking toilet, no leaky faucet, no leakage on the main line inside the house, no water leaks around the outside of the house. When I called the city, they said that my usage has gone up based on the meter, but there's no leak that I can find. What could it be? So I'm going to start by saying, actually, I'm going to pull up an image here real quick so that I can explain while I'm talking here. Whoops, wrong page. Sorry about that. There we go. So this is two different styles of water meter. On the one on the left, you can see that there's a tiny little triangle on the left side of that water meter. That's the indicator that tells you whether there's water moving through the meter. If that's spinning, it means that there's water being used. If it's spinning fast, there's a lot of water being used. If it's spinning slow, it might be a drip or a trickle or something along those lines. But that's how you would tell on that style of meter, and that's typically the style that we see here in Buffalo more often than not. On the right side is a little bit different style of water meter. You can see the black star looking thing on the center of the meter there. That's the usage indicator there. That'll tell you whether there's water flowing through the meter. And I'm assuming it's going to be the same exact process. If it's spinning fast, there's a lot of water going through it. If it's not spinning very fast, there's not much water going through it. But if it's moving, you have water moving somewhere inside the property. That's the one thing that I can tell you for certain, is that if that is moving, you do have water flowing somewhere inside the property, or somewhere past the water meter. I shouldn't say necessarily inside the property, but it's somewhere past the water meter and you are being billed for it. If it's not moving, there's no water that's being used at that moment. So check the meter reading that you have on your bill versus what, that the city is reporting versus what the actual meter reading is. There may have been something that happened and the water meter reading may have been off. You can also have the city come out and check the water meter to make sure that it's actually reading correctly, or request a meter swap if you think that the meter's not reading correctly. They do occasionally go bad. It is a thing that happens once in a while. So that is definitely something to keep in mind. If you have a meter that's in the basement, so if like City of Buffalo, most properties have basements, if you have a meter that's in the basement and that little red thing is spinning, that indicator is spinning, something is running inside the house. If you have a water meter that is located closer to the street, I know in a lot of like southern areas, it'll be like mounted just underground between the house and the street, somewhere in the yard usually. If that's where your water meter is located and you're not seeing anything inside the house, but you are seeing water movement on that indicator, you may have a pipe break somewhere between the water meter and the house. So you might just be losing water underground somewhere that you're not aware of. There are options for water, to be moving even if you're not thinking you're seeing water. It could be a broken pipe underground or something like that that you're still being billed for. The other thing I would mention is toilets will sometimes very, very slowly leak and you won't notice that they're leaking. The best way to test a toilet is to get either a little thing of food coloring or a dye tablet, drop it in the tank, and then wait to see if the dye leaks down into the bowl. That would be an indicator that your toilet is very, very slowly losing water into the bowl, and eventually it's going to sit there and continue to top up. If it's doing that, 3, 4, 5 times an hour, that would be water usage, but it sounds to me like there's something going on there above and beyond just an inaccurate water meter reading. I think that you probably have some sort of a leak somewhere. On to our next question on income requirements. I'm in New York City. I don't know if this is true or if it's legally possible, but I consulted with a real estate agent about renting my property. When I brought up rent prep and running the background check as well as the income check, he said that we currently can't deny people based off of their income, and if you run the background check and income check, we're obligated as landlords to rent the apartment to them. Has anyone had this experience recently? Thank you. So I think what this agent was referring to is that you can't deny someone an apartment based on a lawful source of income. You can still have an income requirement that has to be met. Our income requirement is 3 times the rent in net income, after-tax income. But you do have to base that on lawful sources of income. So the most traditional source of lawful income is standard work. People work, they get a paycheck every week, every 2 weeks, whatever the case may be. That's what most people are going to use to qualify for an apartment. You may have somebody that uses a retirement account to qualify for their apartment. Same basic situation. You may have somebody that has Social Security or some sort of a disability payment, something along those lines. Still lawful sources of income. Section 8 vouchers. So in Erie County where we're operating, Section 8 vouchers were actually required to be considered as a lawful source of income a couple years back. And then during June 2019, when HSTPA passed here in New York, that then became a state law. So it went from being a local ordinance to a state law that Section 8 vouchers do count as a lawful source of income. So there are a lot of things that you have to include when talking about lawful source of income. What do you not have to include? Off the books income. So if somebody's working off the books and receiving cash payments, there's no way to track or verify any of that, so you don't have to count that. It's not a lawful source of income because they're probably not paying taxes on it either. So that's something to keep in mind when you're talking about what is versus what is not a lawful source of income. You are not obligated in this state, in the state of New York, to rent to someone just because you ran a credit and background check. One thing I will mention is that eviction searches are a no-go in New York State now. So if you are running a credit and a background check, make sure whatever service that you're using is not automatically running that eviction search as well, because that could put you into a little bit of hot water. But that is something to keep in mind. You are not obligated to rent to someone just because you do a credit and background check. You are obligated, if you don't accept someone after running a credit check, you are obligated to provide them with an adverse action letter, and they are able to request a free copy of their credit report within, it's either 30 or 60 days of that denial letter from the agency that you pulled the credit report from. So for instance, we use Rent Prep. The person who applies for an apartment, if they're denied, they're entitled to that free credit report. They just have to go to Rent Prep to get it. We can't hand them a copy of their credit report because we are not the agency that pulled it. So that's something to keep in mind. Make sure you're issuing your adverse action letters as necessary. Our last question for the week is on prorating mid-month move-ins. Hey gang, just wondering what the majority of you do when a lease begins mid-month. Do you request that tenant pays for the entire month first and then the second month pays the prorated amount? So what we do is we have the tenant pay the prorated amount in month 1, and then if it's under half a month, we have them pay the prorated amount for month 1 and all of month 2 on the front end. So for instance, if you have a move-in, let me just pull up a calendar here real quick so I can get a date. If you have a move-in on June 4th, that was last Friday, for instance. So if you have a move-in on June 4th, we're going to have that tenant pay rent from June 4th through June 30th. If you have that same move-in and it's on June 18th, we're going to have them pay June 18th through the end of July, through July 31st. So they're going to pay their first and second month's rent all on the front end so that we don't have to worry about chasing them down for that second month of rent, because it would be such a short amount of time between the two payments, essentially. One thing I will mention is that you should always get certified funds for your first month's rent, or if you're collecting like that first and second month, make sure those are certified funds. Don't forget to check for utility switchover before you hand over the keys. That's the last time that you're going to be able to tell somebody they can't move in because they haven't done something that they needed to do. My encouragement to you would be no utility switchover, no keys. You have to verify those utilities are on in the tenant's name before you pass that key off to them. Otherwise, you're in a situation where the tenant is on your utilities on your dime, and that's not what you want. So make sure that the utilities get switched over before that tenant moves in. Also, don't forget to take thorough move-in and move-out photos, as well as have the tenant sign a move-in condition sheet when they move in. But that would be how we handle it. Mid-month move-ins, not a problem. We do them all the time. We just prorate it based on the number of days in the month. And then if it's at the beginning of the month, they just pay the prorated amount. If it's at the end of the month, they pay the prorated for that month and the following month as well. That pretty much wraps things up for this week's episode of Ask a Property Manager. Thank you all so much for joining us. We truly do appreciate it. We love producing Ask a Property Manager, and you can always help us to improve by dropping a question in the comments, either on Facebook or on YouTube, and your question may be answered in an upcoming episode. If you enjoyed this content, or if we brought some value to your day, do us a favor and hit that thumbs up button. YouTube and Facebook both push videos based on community feedback, so every like, comment, subscribe, and share helps us to grow and reach more people. We'll be back next week, June 16th. That's next Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern with another show you won't want to miss. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.